most people don't live their own lives. They live the life their parents wanted, the life society expected, the life fear designed. They wear masks for so long they forget there's a face underneath. They achieve goals that never belong to them. They decorate a house that never felt like home inside their own chest. The Master of Light once said we spend years building a version of ourselves for the world, only to wake up one day and realize we've become a stranger to our own soul. And the tragedy is, most people never realize it. They go to their graves having never met themselves, but not you, not if you're watching this. Today I want to share a truth that touches the heart of every spiritual seeker. Life doesn't truly begin until you find yourself, not the self others want you to be, but the self you were born to become. Let me tell you about a man named David. David was 42 years old when his life fell apart. On paper, he had everything. A successful career as a corporate lawyer, a beautiful house in the suburbs, a wife, 2 children, respect from his colleagues, financial security. He'd done everything right, followed all the rules, checked all the boxes. And yet every morning when he looked in the mirror, he didn't recognize the man staring back at him. He'd wake up with a heaviness in his chest, a sense of dread that had nothing to do with anything being wrong and everything to do with nothing being right. His days were filled with meetings, deadlines, and obligations. His evenings with family routines and exhausted silences. His weekends with chores and social commitments he didn't want to fulfill. He was busy, productive, successful, but he wasn't alive. The truth is, David had never chosen this life. Not really. His father was a lawyer. His father's father was a lawyer. It was expected. When David was 18, confused about his future, his father said, "Law school, it's a good path, stable, respectable." So David went to law school. He was good at it. Good enough to succeed. Good enough to convince himself he'd made the right choice. Good enough to build a career, a reputation, a life. But somewhere deep inside, in a place he rarely allowed himself to visit, there was a voice, quiet at first, then louder, then screaming. "This isn't your life. This is someone else's life. You're an actor playing a role and you don't even know your lines." For years, David silenced that voice, drowned it out with work, with achievement, with busyness. He told himself, this is what adults do. This is responsibility, this is maturity. But the voice never stopped. It just went underground. Until one Tuesday afternoon, sitting in a partner meeting, discussing a case he didn't care about for a client he'd never met, something inside David broke. Not dramatically, not visibly, but completely. He looked around the conference table at men and women in expensive suits discussing billable hours and strategy, and he thought, I don't belong here. I've never belonged here. I don't even know who I am. That night, David did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He opened an old box in his garage. Inside were notebooks, dozens of them, filled with poems he'd written as a teenager, before law school, before the life that was chosen for him, before he became someone else. He sat on the concrete floor of his garage, reading words written by a boy he barely remembered. A boy who dreamed of being a writer, who filled pages with observations about the world, about people, about meaning. A boy who got buried alive somewhere along the way. And David wept. Not soft tears, but deep, guttural sobs that came from a place so buried he'd forgotten it existed. He was grieving the life he never lived, the self he never became. The Master of Light teaches about moments like this. He called them the desert experience, those times when everything you've built suddenly feels like sand slipping through your fingers. He taught that there comes a moment in every person's journey when they must choose, continue living the life others designed for them, or have the courage to discover who they truly are. Most people, when faced with this choice, run back to the familiar, back to the safe, back to the identity they've constructed, even if it suffocates them. But a few, the brave ones, the seekers, walk into the desert. They leave behind the comfortable prison of other people's expectations and venture into the terrifying freedom of self-discovery. The Master taught something profound, that we're not born to live someone else's dream. We're born with our own legend to fulfill, our own truth to discover, our own song to sing. But somewhere along the way we forget this. We trade our authentic path for approval. We exchange our soul's calling for security. We become so good at being what others want that we forget what we want. And life, real life, the kind that makes your heart beat faster and your soul feel at home, remains just out of reach. The Master of Light said, "Before a dream is realized, the soul of the world tests everything that was learned along the way. It does this not because it is evil, but so that we can master the lessons we've learned as we move toward our dream." David's crisis wasn't a breakdown, it was a breakthrough. His soul was finally demanding to be heard. The Master often spoke about the personal legend, that unique purpose each person is born to fulfill, not a career, not a role, but a calling that comes from the deepest part of who you are. He taught that the universe conspires to help those who pursue their personal legend, but first, you must know what it is. And to know what it is, you must know who you are. This is the paradox. You cannot find your path until you find yourself, and you cannot find yourself until you're willing to lose everything you've pretended to be. David was standing at this crossroads. The life he'd built was crumbling, but something new was trying to be born. For weeks after that night in the garage, David couldn't shake what he'd discovered. The poems, the dreams, the person he used to be. He began asking himself questions he'd avoided for decades. Who am I without my job title? Who am I without my accomplishments? Who am I beneath all the roles I play? What would I do if I wasn't afraid? What does my soul want, not my ego? These questions terrified him, because he didn't have answers. The Master of Light used to say, this is where the real journey begins, in the not knowing, in the uncomfortable space between who you were and who you're becoming. David started small. He began waking up an hour earlier each morning before his family stirred, before his professional identity took over. He'd sit with coffee and write, not legal briefs, just thoughts, observations, truth. At first, nothing came. His mind was full of judgments. This is stupid. You're 42. You have responsibilities. What are you doing? But he kept showing up, day after day, pen to paper, soul to silence. And slowly, something began to emerge. A voice. Not the voice of the successful lawyer, the responsible father, the dutiful son, but a different voice, quieter, older, more true, his own voice. The Master of Light taught, there is only one way to learn. It's through action. Everything you need to know you have learned through your journey. David's journey was just beginning. He started noticing patterns. How much of his day was spent maintaining an image? How many conversations were performances? How often he said yes when he meant no? How rarely he felt anything real? He realized he'd spent 20 years building a fortress around himself, not to keep others out, but to keep his true self locked in, safe, hidden, unexpressed. The Master spoke of this too, about how we imprison ourselves in comfort, how we choose the familiar cage over the uncertain freedom, how we protect ourselves from failure by never truly trying to live. David saw this pattern everywhere now, in his colleagues who drank too much, in his neighbours who smiled too brightly, in his own reflection, which looked successful but felt hollow. They were all living half-lives, safe lives, lives that looked impressive from the outside, but felt empty on the inside. One night his wife found him in the garage again, surrounded by old notebooks. "What's happening to you?" she asked, not unkindly but worried. David looked at her, this woman he'd married, built a life with but rarely truly seen, and said something he'd never said out loud. "I don't think I know who I am. I don't think I ever have." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that surprised him. "I know. I've known for years." They talked until dawn, really talked. Not about schedules or children or bills, but about truth, about fear, about the lives they'd built versus the lives they'd dreamed. She admitted she felt it too. The hollowness, the sense of playing a role, the quiet desperation of doing everything right and feeling everything wrong. The Master of Light said, when we strive to become better than we are, everything around us becomes better too. David's awakening was becoming contagious. David didn't quit his job the next day. He didn't blow up his life. He didn't make dramatic, reckless changes. But he did something far more radical. He started being honest. He began saying no to cases that didn't align with his values. He started having real conversations instead of transactional ones. He carved out time for writing, for reading, for thinking, things that fed his soul rather than just his bank account. People noticed. Some were confused. Others were judgmental. A few partners at his firm questioned his commitment. But something interesting happened. David stopped caring what they thought. Not because he'd become arrogant, but because he'd found something more valuable than their approval. He'd found himself. The Master of Light taught that when you honour your truth, the universe responds. Not always in the ways you expect, but always in the ways you need. For David, opportunities began appearing. A smaller firm reached out, one that handled cases he actually cared about. His writing, which he'd started sharing cautiously online, resonated with people. Connections formed with others on similar journeys. His relationship with his wife deepened. His children noticed a change in him. He was more present, more genuine, more alive. He wasn't suddenly happy all the time. The journey of self-discovery is difficult, uncomfortable, often lonely. But he was authentic. And authenticity, the Master said, is worth more than happiness. Because authenticity leads to the kind of joy that doesn't depend on circumstances. David learned what the Master of Light had been teaching all along. Life begins not when you achieve success, not when you accumulate wealth, not when you reach some external milestone. Life begins when you stop pretending, when you take off the mask, when you honour the person you were born to be instead of the person you were taught to become. Everyone seems to have a clear idea of how other people should lead their lives, but none about their own. David spent 40 years living according to other people's ideas. Now finally he was living his own. He still had hard days. Days when he questioned everything. Days when the old life seemed easier, safer, more reasonable. But he'd tasted truth, and once you taste truth, you can never go back to the comfort of lies, even comfortable ones. The Master of Light said, "The secret of life is to fall 7 times and to get up 8 times. David fell, often, but he kept getting up, kept choosing himself, kept honouring the voice inside that said, 'This is who you are, this is your path, walk it.' So let me ask you, who are you beneath all the roles you play? Not who are you to your family, your employer, your friends, but who are you to yourself? Who are you in the quiet moments when no one's watching and you don't have to perform? If you can't answer that question, you're not alone. Most people can't. Because most people have spent their entire lives building an identity for others, becoming what was expected, playing the part, following the script. But the Master of Light taught that there comes a moment, sometimes subtle, sometimes dramatic, when your soul demands to be heard, when the life you've built no longer fits, when you can't ignore the voice inside saying, 'There's more, you're more, stop pretending.' That moment might be now. You might be like David, successful on paper, empty inside. You might have everything you thought you wanted and nothing you actually need. Or you might be younger, just beginning, feeling the pressure to become someone you're not sure you want to be. Either way, the question is the same. Will you have the courage to find yourself? Tonight, take 5 minutes and write one honest sentence. This is who I have been pretending to be, and this is who I feel I really am. You don't need to show it to anyone. It's a first handshake with yourself, not someday, not when it's convenient, not when you feel ready, now. Because the Master of Light made this clear, one day you will wake up and there won't be any more time to do the things you've always wanted. Do it now. Life is not waiting for you to be ready. Life is not waiting for permission. Life is waiting for you to be real. David is 45 now. 3 years since that night in the garage. 3 years since he started the journey back to himself. His life looks different than it did. Smaller in some ways, richer in others, less impressive to outsiders, more meaningful to him. He writes every morning, he works on cases he believes in. He has fewer friends but deeper connections. He makes less money but feels wealthier. Most importantly, when he looks in the mirror now, he recognizes the face looking back, because he found himself, and in finding himself, his life finally began. He had crossed his inner desert, and on the other side, he didn't find a new world waiting for him. He found himself, and that was enough to make everything new. The Master of Light's message is simple but profound. You were not born to live someone else's dream. You were born to discover and fulfill your own. Life begins when you find yourself. Not the version of you that makes others comfortable, not the version that fits in, not the version that's safe, the real you. The one buried beneath years of conditioning and fear and expectation. That person is still there, waiting, patient. The only question is, how much longer will you keep them waiting?